your interview, how to conduct an analysis, how to write your summary and analysis paper, and then how to submit your work by the end of the week. Once you've done your interview, the first step is to transcribe it, which means you're going to type up word for word the questions that you asked and the responses that your teacher gave you. You probably have to listen to your recording several times to make sure that you're typing up the response accurately. If you want to include any kind of notes about things that you were thinking about or observations that you made during the interview, you can do so, but put those things in italics so it's clear to me what part is the response and what part is your notes. Do not include any identifying information in your transcript. In fact, the only place where the teacher's name will actually be is going to be in the consent form. Once you finish your transcript, the next step is to do the analysis. And this is also going to take some time because I want you to be very careful that you are looking for evidence in the interview or in your observations that leads you to believe or to find a connection to any of the theories or concepts about development that we have talked about so far in the course. You're going to do the same thing again in week 9, but in that case you're going to be looking for evidence of learning, teaching, assessment, and motivation. Right now you're just focusing only on development, which are general ideas about development, the different domains of development. You're also going to look for what the teacher talks about in terms of learner differences or things that the teacher says about factors that affect his or her students' development. You may have to make inferences because likely the teacher is not going to be very explicit about specific theories or concepts. When you make an inference, you're drawing a conclusion based on evidence that you have from things that the teacher said or things that you observed. The more evidence you have, the more valid your inference is. So try to avoid jumping to a conclusion that just because a teacher says one thing or you see or observe one thing in the classroom, that is a direct connection then to a theory or a concept. Look for multiple sources of evidence, which means it's going to take you some time to go back and review that interview to make sure that you've got that evidence to include. The next step is to write your summary and analysis. Go back and review the assignment guidelines so you know exactly what you are required to include in the introduction, in the body, and in the conclusion. Look at the scoring guide to see how you're going to be assessed. And then read the sample that I've provided for you also in Blackboard so you can see how I would establish a purpose, how I would develop content, and how I would organize that content if I were doing this paper. The introduction in the paper is the place that you're going to help provide context for the reader so that the reader knows who that teacher is, how you selected that teacher. It'll help the reader know something about that teacher's classroom, about the school in which he or she works. And if you think it's important, anything about the district or about the community that again provides additional insight that will help us better understand that teacher's responses. Then, looking at your analysis, you're going to talk about 3 to 5 key findings from the interview and or your observations that you think provide insight into that teacher's perspective on development. Likely you're going to find multiple things that you want to talk about, but focus on 3 to 5 of your key findings because your paper is only so long. So just choose 3 to 5 that you think really stand out. In the body of your paper, you're going to address those 3 to 5 key findings. You're going to talk about what it is, what connection that you're making between what the teacher's saying or things that you observe and theories or concepts in educational psychology about development. It's going to be critical that you make that connection very clear. So try to avoid assuming that your reader knows what that theory or concept is. Explain what it is, and then explain how you see that connecting to what the teacher has said or things that you have observed in the classroom. If you are going to, you're going to include direct quotes and paraphrases from the interview, but you don't have to cite those using APA because your whole paper is about the same interview. So the only things you need to cite using APA are any information that you provide from the textbook or from any kind of required resources that help to support the findings that you're presenting in this body. Any additional resources that you use, you need to include in a list of references. Okay, once you have finished writing, the next step is for you to put it aside. And then after a while, come back and reread it. And make sure that you have done a really good job of providing a clear connection between things that the teacher said and things that you observed and theories or concepts that you have read about in the course that are related to development. You may find that you need to explain something a little bit more, or you maybe need to give more examples so that it's very clear to the reader what you're trying to say. You also want to make sure that you've established a purpose by including a thesis statement in your introduction. You want to see that you've maintained that purpose by providing transitions from one paragraph to the next. You want to see that you've developed the content. You've explained examples. You've explained what the quotations mean that you provided. And you want to see that you've provided a logical organizational structure. You have a clear introduction, the body is clear, and the conclusion is clear. I'd recommend you asking a friend or a family member to read your paper so that since they weren't part of the interview, they've never read your transcript, they'll be able to look at your paper with fresh eyes. And they're going to rely on your communication skills to make sure that they understand the connections that you're making. So they would be a great source for ideas for how to elaborate on things, maybe include different examples, maybe explain what those theories or concepts are so that it's very clear to them. If it's clear to them, it's probably going to be clear to most readers. When you go to submit by the end of the week, you need to submit your consent form and your interview transcript. But please do not submit images. I know that you downloaded the consent form and they had to sign it. You probably are going to scan it or take a photograph of that consent form, but I don't want you to submit that as an image. I want you to insert that image into a Word document and then submit the document. Submit your interview transcript as a document, not as an image. You're also going to submit your summary and analysis to Turnitin, which is a tool in Blackboard that's going to double check to make sure that you've done a good job of citing your sources. You're welcome to resubmit to Turnitin multiple times. Each time you're going to get a similarity index, which will give you some information about how well you did at citing your sources. If you feel that Turnitin has some issues with some of your citations, make changes to your paper and then resubmit it to Turnitin and try to get that similarity index lower. Once you've done that and you've submitted your consent form and your transcript, you're ready to submit your paper then to the assignment link in the week 3 folder. You must submit all 3 of those things, the consent form, the interview transcript, and your summary and analysis to Turnitin in order to earn points on your final paper. If you have any questions, post them to Ask the Professor and I'll be glad to answer them there. Or if you have a more personal question, send me an email, I'll be glad to help.